Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello guys, how's life? So I'm Novita Dian Utari and I wanna explain to you. People in the back, can you hear me clearly? Okay, good. Have you ever had a question in mind that it becomes part of how you think? Maybe even part of who you are as a person? Well, I've had a question in my mind for many years, and that's how can you speed up learning? Now, this is an interesting question because if you speed up learning, you can spend less time at school. And if you learn really fast, you probably wouldn't have to go to school at all. Now, when I was young, school was as sort of okay, but I found quite often that school got in the way of learning. So I had this question in mind: how do you learn faster? And this began when I was very young, when I was 11 years old. I wrote a letter to researchers in the Soviet Union asking about hypnopedia. This is sleep learning, where you get a tape recorder, you put it beside your bed, and it turns on in the middle of the night. When you are sleeping and you are supposed to be learning from this. A good idea, unfortunately it doesn't work, but hypnopedia opened the doors to research in other areas. And we've had incredible discoveries about learning that began with the first question. I went on from there to become passionate about psychology, and I have been involved in psychology in many different ways for the rest of my life up until this point. In 1981, I took myself to China and I decided that I was going to be native level in Chinese inside 2 years. Now you need to understand that in 1981, everybody thought Chinese was really difficult and that a Westerner could study for 10 years or more and never really get very good at it. And I also went in with a different idea, which was taking all of the conclusions from psychological research up to that point and applying them to the learning process. What was really cool was that in 6 months I was fluent in Mandarin Chinese, and it took a little bit longer to get up to native. But I looked around and I saw all of these people from different countries struggling terribly with Chinese. I saw Chinese people struggling terribly to learn English and other languages, and so my question got refined down to how can you help a normal adult learn a new language quickly, easily, and effectively? Now this is a really important question in today's world. We have massive challenge with environment. We have massive challenge with social dislocation, with wars, all sorts of things going on, and if we can't communicate, we're really going to have difficulty solving these problems. So we need to be able to speak each other's language. This is really important. The question then is, how do you do that? Well, it's actually really easy. You look around for people who can already do it. Look for situations where it's already working, and then you identify the principles and apply them. It's called modeling, and I've been looking at language learning and modeling language learning for about 15 to 20 years old now, and my conclusion, my observation from this is that any adult can learn a second language to fluency inside 6 months. Now when I say this, most people think I'm crazy. This is not possible. So let me remind everybody of the history of human progress. It's all about expanding our limits. In 1950, everybody believed that running 1 mile in 4 minutes was impossible. And then Roger Bannister did it in 1956. And from there, it's got shorter and shorter. 100 years ago, everybody believed that heavy stuff doesn't fly. Okay, except it does, and we all know this. How does heavy stuff fly? We reorganize the material using principles that we have learned from observing nature, birds in this case. And today we've gone even further. We've gone even further, so you can fly a car. You can buy one of these for a couple 100 US dollars. We now have cars in the world that fly. And there's a different way to fly which we've learned from squirrels. So all you need to do is copy what is a flying squirrel does. Build a suite called a wing. Build a suite called a wing suite, and off you go. You can fly like a squirrel. Now most people, I wouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people think they can't draw. However, there are some key principles. 5 principles that you can apply to learning to draw, and you can actually learn to draw in 5 days. So if you draw like this, you learn these principles apply them, and after 5 days you can draw something like this. Now this is true because that was my first drawing, and after 5 days of applying these principles, that was what I was able to do. And I looked at this and I went, wow, so that's how concentrating so intensely that my brain is exploding. So anybody can learn to draw in 5 days. And in the same way, with the same logic, anybody can learn a second language in 6 months. How there are 5 principles and 7 actions. There may be a few more, but these are absolutely core. And before I get into those, I just want to talk about 2 myths. I want to dispel 2 myths. The first is that you need talent. Let me tell you about Zoe. Zoe came from Australia, went to Holland, was trying to learn Dutch, struggling extremely a great deal, and finally people were saying, you are completely useless. You are not talented. Give up. You are a waste of time. And she was very depressed. And then she came across these 5 principles. She moved to Brazil and she applied them. And in 6 months, she was fluent in Portuguese. So talent doesn't matter. People also think that immersion in a new country is the way to learn a language. But look around Hong Kong. Look at all the Westerners. We've been here from 10 years who don't speak a word of Chinese. Look at all the Chinese living in America, Britain, Australia, Canada. Have been there 10, 20 years and they don't speak any English. Immersion person. Why? Because a drowning man cannot learn to swim. When you don't speak a language, you're like a baby. And if you drop yourself into a context which is all adults talking about stuff over your head you won't learn. So what are the 5 principles that you need to pay attention to? First, the 4 words: attention, meaning, relevance, and memory. And this interconnect in a very, very important ways, especially when you are talking about learning. Come with me and come with me on a journey. Come with me on a journey. Come with me on a journey through a forest. You go on a walk through a forest and you see something like this, little marks on a tree. Maybe you pay attention, maybe you don't. You go another 50 meters and you see this. You should be paying attention. Another 50 meters. If you haven't been paying attention, you see this. And at this point, you are paying attention and you've just learned that this is important. It's relevant because it means this and anything that's related in any information related to your survival is stuff that you are going to pay attention to. And therefore, you are going to remember it. If it's related to your personal goals, then you are going to pay attention to it. If it's relevant, you are going to remember it. So, the first principle for learning a language is focus on language content that is relevant to you, which brings us to tools. We master tools by using tools and we learn tools the fastest. So let me share a story. A keyboard is a tool. Typing Chinese a certain way. There are methods for this. That's a tool. I had a colleague many years ago who went to night school. Thursday night, 2 hours each time practicing at home. She spent 9 months and she did not learn to type Chinese. And one night we had a crisis. We had 48 hours to deliver a training manual in Chinese. And she got the job. And I can guarantee you, in 48 hours, she learned to type Chinese because it was relevant. It was meaningful. It was important. She was using a tool to create value. So the second principle for learning a language is to use your language as a tool to communicate right from day one. As a kid does. When I first arrived in China, I didn't speak a word of Chinese. And on my second week, I got to take a train ride overnight. I spent 8 hours sitting in the dining car talking to one of the guards on the train. He took an interest in me for some reason, and we just chat all night in Chinese, and he was drawing pictures and making movements with his hands and facial expressions, and piece by piece I understood more and more. But what was really cool was 2 weeks later, when people were talking Chinese around me, I was understanding some of this, and I had not even made any effort to learn that. What had happened, I absorbed it night on the train, which brings us to the third principles. When you first understand the message, then you will acquire the language unconsciously, and this is really well documented now. It's something called comprehensible input. There's 20 or 30 years of research on this. Stephen Rosen, a leader in the field, has published all sorts of these different studies, and this is just from one of them. The purple bars show the scores on different tests for language. The purple people were people who had learned by grammar and formal study. The green ones are the ones who learned by comprehensible input. So, comprehensible works comprehension is K. And language learning is not about accumulating lots of knowledge. In many ways, it's about psychological training. A woman I know from Taiwan did great in English at school. She got A grades all the way through. Went through college, A grades, went to the US, and found she couldn't understand what people were saying. And people started asking her, "Are you deaf?" And she was English deaf. Because we have filters in our brain that filter in the sounds that we are familiar with, and they filter out the sounds of languages that were not. And if you can't hear it, if you won't understand it. If you can't understand it, you are not going to learn it. So you actually have to be able to hear these sounds. And there are ways to do that, but it's psychological training. Speaking text muscle. You've got 43 muscles. You have to coordinate those in a way that you make sounds that other people will understand. If you've ever done a new sport for a couple of days and you know how your body feels hurt, if your face is hurting, you are doing it right. And the final principle is state, psychological state. If you are sad, angry, worried, upset, you are not going to learn, period. If you are happy, relaxed, in an alpha brain state, curious, you are going to learn really quickly, and very specifically, you need to be tolerant of ambiguity. If you are one of those people who need to understand 100% every word you are hearing, you will go nuts. Because you will be incredibly upset at that time. Because you are not perfect. If you are comfortable with getting some, not getting some, just paying attention to what you do understand. You are going to be fine, relaxed, and you'll be learning quickly. So, based on those 5 principles, what are 7 actions that you take? Number 1, listen a lot. I call it brain speaking. You put yourself in a context. When to the rhythms, to patterns that repeat. You are listening to things that stand out, Chinese, Ponozi, English, so just speak your brain in this. The second action that you get the meaning first. Even before you get the words, you go, well, how do I do that? I don't know the words. Well, you understand what those human communication is body language in many ways. So much body learn language. From body language, you can understand a lot of communication. Therefore, you are understanding, you are acquiring through comprehensible input. And you can also use patterns that you already know. If you are a Chinese speaker of Mandarin and you go to Vietnam, you will understand 60% of what they say to you in daily conversation, because Vietnam's is about 30% Cantonese. The third action, start mixing. You probably have never thought of this, but if you are got 10 verbs, 10 nouns and 10 adjectives, you can say 1,000 different things. Language is a creative process. What do babies do? Creative, have fun with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, just has to work. And when you are doing this, you focus on the core. What does that mean? Well, any language is high frequency content. In English, 1,000 words covers 85% of anything you are ever going to say in daily communication. 30,000 words give you 98% of anything you are going to say in daily conversation. You got 30,000 words, you are speaking the language. The rest is icing on the cake. When And when you are just beginning with a new language, start with your toolbox. Week number 1. In your new language, you say things like, "How do you say that? I don't understand. Repeat that, please." What does that in your target language? You are using it as a tool, making it useful to you. It's relevant to learn other things about the language. By week 2, you should be saying things like me, this, you, that, give, you know, hot, simple pronouns, simple nouns, simple verbs, simple adjectives, communicating like a baby. And by the 3rd or 4th week, you are getting into glue words, although, but, therefore. These are logical transformers. They are bits of a language together, allowing you to make more complex meaning. At that point, you are talking. And when you are doing that, you should get yourself a language parent. If you look at how children and parents interact, you'll understand what this means. When a child is speaking, it will be using simple words, simple combinations, sometimes quite strange, sometimes very strange pronunciations. Other people from outside the family don't understand it, but the parents do. And so the kid has a safe environment, gets confidence. The parents talk to the children with body language. And with simple language, then they know the child understands. So you have a comprehensible input. Environment that's safe. We know it works, otherwise none of you would speak your mother tongue. So you get yourself a language parent, who's somebody interested in you as a person, who will communicate with you essentially as an equal. But pay attention to help you understand the message. There are 4 rules of a parent language. The 4 rules are, first of all, they will work hard to understand what you mean, even when you are way off beat. Secondly, they will never correct your mistakes. Thirdly, they will feedback, can respond appropriately and get that feedback. And then they will use words that you know. The 6th thing you have to do is copy the face. You got to get the muscles working right, so you can sound in a way that people will understand you. There's a couple of things you do. One is that you hear how it feels and feel how it sounds, which means you have a feedback loop operating in your face. But ideally, if you can look at a native speaker and just observe how they use their face, let your unconscious mind absorb the rules, then you are going to be able to pick it up. And if you can't get a native speaker to look at, you can use stuff like this: female voice, sing, song, king, stang, hung, Chris Losdale. And the final idea here, the final action you need to take, is something that I call direct connect. What does this mean? Well, most people learning a second language sort of take the mother tongue words and the target words and go over them again and again in their mind to try and remember them. Really inefficient. What you need to do is realize that everything you know is an image inside your mind. It's feelings. If you talk about fire, you can smell the smoke. You can hear the crackling, you can see the... So what you do is you go into the imagery and all of the memory, and you come out with another pathway. So I call it same box, different path. You come out of the pathway and you build it over time. You become more and more skilled at just connecting the new sounds to those images that you already have into the internal representation, and over time you even become naturally good at the process that becomes unconscious. So there are 5 principles that you need to work with, 7 actions. If you don't any of them, you are going to improve. And remember, these are things under your control as the learner. Do them all and you are going to be fluent. Okay, I think enough for my explanation. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.